Okay, so during this Ur 3 period, uh, Ur becomes the center of some people call it an empire or at least a regional state, but Ur kind of becomes one of the most powerful cities in southern Mesopotamia and rules over a coalition of the rest of the uh, traditionally Sumerian city states. Uh, the Sumerian language and culture becomes important once again, even though the population probably speaks a mixture of Akkadian and Sumerian. One of the most important kings during this time period is Ur-Nammu, who really becomes he starts off as a general and then becomes kind of the king of Ur. He helps defeat the Gudian invaders, and a lot of the artwork that we have from Ur-Nammu depicts him as a builder. In fact, he constructs several temples in Ur and actually constructs the famous Ziggurat, which I've shown you pictures of before. The most prominent building in Ur today is the Ziggurat that Ur-Nammu constructed. I'll show you some more pictures of that. He's also credited with writing and setting down the first law code, at least the one that we have the earliest evidence for. So this is about 400 years before Hammurabi of Babylon, and his law code is actually more liberal than Hammurabi's, as we'll see when we talk about Hammurabi's law code. He administers this large area, and as we're going to see, the Ur 3 period is known for enormous amounts of tax dealing with bureaucracy, receipts, sales, and other things. Units are standardized in terms of silver and grain. They used silver rods and cut pieces of silver rods to pay for things at this time. This is a dedication statue. We're going to see a number of these, right? But this is typical of the Ur 3 period. It was buried under the foundation of an important building that a king constructed. Usually depicted the king carrying a basket of bricks on his head with an inscription on it as well. Another important piece from this time period, this Ur 3 period, and Ur-Nammu, is this stela, stone sculpture that again shows it has a lot of religious and building themes in it. This is very different from the Ram-Sin's stela, which is mainly depicting war and conquest, and where Naram-Sin is the largest figure in the scene. Here it's different. Ur-Nammu is not the largest figure. Most of it is dealing with religion and also with building. So here he is in front of a goddess. This is Ur-Nammu right here. So in some depictions he has a beard. In other depictions he doesn't have a beard. A lot of it probably has to do with context. That is he sort of depicted as a priest or is he depicted as a king? Here you can see Ur-Nammu carrying building tools across his shoulder there as they get work or as they start work on one of the construction projects, and you can see a seated god here. This is probably Utu or Shamash, the sun god, because of the rod and that measuring tool. Right, and here you can see, obviously a deity leading the way with the horned helmet, and there's Ur-Nammu behind him. Okay, the Ur 3 period is significant because we have more tablets from this specific period, which only is about 100 years, than all other periods. And that's quite amazing when you think about it. We have something like hundreds of thousands of texts from this time period. 40,000 have been translated. Many of them are government texts. Many of them deal with economic receipts and records, the purchasing of sheep, the purchasing and movement of other different goods. So it looks like in the Ur III period, bureaucracy really is the fore, even more so than military force. The Ur III period is known for administration. And so because of all these texts, a lot of studies are possible on the economy of the Ur III period. We know a lot about the economy and trade from the Ur III period because there's just so much documentation. And if you go on that Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, you'll see lots and lots of these Ur III texts. This is a real estate document, so you can see kind of a parcel of land and the measurements. And so it looks like the state is controlling many things at this point, including different industries, especially the textile industry. Now, at this point, if you, let's say, and we'll talk more about this when we look at gender roles in Mesopotamia, but if you were a widow and you didn't have, in ancient Mesopotamia, and you didn't have a lot of support, one sort of safety net was the temple and the temple textile industry, where essentially the temple would take care of you, would house you and feed you, and in exchange you would work on creating textiles for the temple that they would then use as trade goods for, and as wealth, but trade goods for other products. Right? So we have lots of texts from this time period that deal with the textile industry, and at this time, women and children were the main producers in terms of textiles. We can see that some of the women, many of the women, were low-status female workers. Right? We almost get the sense that the importance of the textiles did not extend to the status of the people producing those textiles. There were free, semi-free, and then there were also dependent workers, people who were, as I said before, widows who were basically, servants of the temple. A lot of this work was done by low-status women, but managed by elite men or sometimes women themselves. So elite women could also end up managing some of these textile industries. The workshops would typically have dozens of laborers in them. Okay, so the Ur III state is called the Ur III state, not surprisingly, because it really centers on the city of Ur as kind of this integrated state. And here we can see several depictions of Ur-Nammu, right, from the stela as a king, kind of as a priest carrying these baskets of bricks, and we have several statues from the foundations of buildings. We also have these stamped bricks, like we saw in the Akkadian period, and they all have the same sort of message. It's usually the king, what is being built, for who it's being built. Right, so the king for a specific god is building blank, and you'll recognize again some of the cuneiform symbols, right, such as the Dinger symbol, which means god or goddess, right. So for the goddess Inanna, right, his lady, Ur-Nammu, who is the king, king of Ur. Right, so Lugal Urim, Lugal Ki-An-Gi is what the ancient name was for Sumer, and Ki-Uri-Ke is Akkad. That's the ancient Sumerian name for Akkad. What you'll recognize also is here the symbol A, which means house. Again, it looks like kind of a checkerboard. And then usually these stamps from the Ur III period will end with Munadu, which means has built. And the do symbol is kind of like the cones that we've seen before, those dedicatory cones that had inscriptions on them that were placed on the wall of buildings that were constructed by kings and things like that. Right? Okay, so And here kind of is the full inscription, and here you can see the transliteration as well. So I'm sure if you ever see this in the museum, these kinds of inscriptions, you'll recognize king, you'll probably recognize house, you'll probably recognize the symbol for god or goddess, and you'll know immediately, oh, this is a dedication. It's a king who's building a temple dedicated to a specific god. Okay, the artwork that we see, and you saw this from the statue of Gudea of Lagash. Let's go back. This was before the Ur III period. Right, so right before the Ur III period, this Gudean period. The artwork is a mixture of Akkadian and early dynastic. So it sort of takes some of these early Sumerian ideas and motifs and artistic styles, but also uses the more advanced kind of musculature from the Akkadian period. Right? And we see that continuing on in the Ur III period. So you can see how much more realism here in this head of a ruler. The ziggurat that Ur-Nammu constructed is one of the most impressive things in southern Mesopotamia today. It's about 60 feet high, and we have not just the archaeological evidence, but the written evidence for his rebuilding of this ziggurat. Right, the temple would be at the top of the ziggurat. This is how it looked when, in the early days, just around the time that Leonard Woolley was excavating at Ur. We're going to talk about some of Leonard Woolley's other excavations at Ur. He not only excavated the royal tombs, as we all know, but he also excavated material from the Ur III period, such as the stela of Ur-Nammu, but he also excavated a neighborhood from a slightly later time period, the period right after the Ur III period, that gives us a window into what city life was like at this time. Here's some people on the ziggurat for scale. You can see here it was made out of sun-baked, the exterior were kiln-baked bricks, so very, very hard, and the interior were sun-dried bricks. The outer casing would protect the inner cores when it was first built, so they didn't have to worry about erosion. Obviously, you can see since then, though, there's been a lot of erosion. This is what it looks like today. Saddam Hussein kind of restored it, quote unquote. Many conservationists think he didn't really do a very good job because he wasn't, and the people under him weren't consistent in terms of the materials. Also, in ancient times, they used bitumen, that natural asphalt, as a mortar for some of the bricks that were used to build the ziggurat. This is what it would have looked like back then. So that second story you can see here, there would have been an additional story with the temple on top of it. And I'm sure you've seen pictures of this ziggurat before. This is when Iraq still had a good tourism industry. This was one of the most visited sites in Iraq. Right, this is a site was recently visited by the Pope because, as we've said before, many people believe that Ur was the birthplace of the patriarch Abraham. You get an idea of just how impressive this ancient ziggurat was. So it was dedicated to the moon god Nana, the main god of Ur, and the court of Nana over here. So I'll just show you a few pictures just so you can kind of get an idea of what it might have looked like back during its heyday, when they might have actually taken the image occasionally out of the temple, paraded it through the streets, right? And it would have been a very impressive sight and sort of the center of the city itself, as you can see here. And this is kind of during Leonard Woolley's time, and then you can see the sort of restoration that took place later on. Ur-Nammu dies in battle against the Gudeans, and his son then takes over Shulgi. So Shulgi declares himself to be divine in the tradition of Naram-Sin, and continues the Ur-3 dynasty from his father. A lot of the hymns that we get from the Ur-3 period emphasize the religious power and the building projects of the kings over military glorification. And kings also emphasize their religious and ceremonial role as consorts of Inanna, probably related to the sacred marriage ceremony that we've talked about before. That might have been kind of almost like a fertility rite that would have happened once a year. This is a text from Shulgi, King of the Four Corners of the Universe am I, Herdsman, Shepherd of the Blackheads am I. Those are the Sumerians, or the southern Mesopotamians. The trustworthy, the God of all the lands am I. So depicting himself not as sort of a wreaker of havoc, a destroyer of enemies, but a herdsman, a shepherd, religious and ceremonial roles. And there are also texts that describe Shulgi as a consort of Inanna. Right? He entered to Inanna and the shrine of Eanna. Shulgi, the righteous shepherd, the loving heart, dressed himself in a festive garment. Inanna looked on in wonder, broke spontaneously into song, utters it as a chant. When for the bull, for the Lord, I shall have bathed. When by his fair hand my loins shall have been shaped, when on the bed he shall have caressed me, then I will caress my Lord. A sweet fate I will decree for him. So, kind of a different emphasis. We've seen a different emphasis in the artwork that depicts the kings as builders. We have a different emphasis in the text than the previous Akkadian period. Right? So we can kind of see the growth of the, from the sort of intermediate period where you have Gudea of Lagash, then the Ur-3 period, this expansion up to the area and into part of the area of the Elamites, these people who lived in now what's modern day Iran, that were competitive with the people of southern Mesopotamia for a long time. And then under Shulgi's reign, an expansion using diplomatic ties of sort of an area of treaties and political alliances. We can see the area of influence of the Ur-3 period and the area of control of the Ur-3 dynasty. And the Ur-3 period doesn't last very long. It comes to an end when the Elamites attack and sack Ur, right, and capture the city and destroy it, and that kind of ends the dominance of Ur for that time period. And we get a new series of political alliances that emerge as a result. Right? But the Elamites and their capture and their attack of Ur is something that was written about in a lengthy poem, Lament for Ur, which this lament has parallels in some of the Book of Lamentations in the Bible, like where it says, I sat by the rivers of Babylon and wept when I remembered Zion. Here, O city, your name exists, but you have been destroyed. O city, your wall rises high, but your land is perished. O my city, like an innocent ewe, your lamb has been torn from you. O city, your rights have been alienated from you. Your powers have been changed into alien powers. Right, so, and it goes on from there. So it's a poem that really describes the pain that people felt at the destruction of Ur. So, just like the end of the Akkadian period, it's kind of a blip in the long history of Mesopotamia. It's not the end, but something new reemerges from it. And that's something that we're seeing more and more in looking at Mesopotamian history, is that there's continuity, but there's also change as within each period. There's some things that are consistent, and there's cultural elements that remain the same or are passed down from one generation to the next. And then new populations coming in then help create something new. So by 2000 BC, the Orthrey period is over, and we enter a new period called the Isin-Larsa period. Some of these periods are kind of hard to remember. It's only called this because Isin and Larsa are two of the major cities of this period. It's a fairly short period, and that during this period, as we're going to see, we have the movement of new Semitic groups coming into southern Mesopotamia. Those new groups end up establishing the Babylonian dynasties and the Assyrian dynasties. The Old Babylonian period is the period of Hammurabi. The Old Assyrian period is at the same time, but in the northern part of Mesopotamia. And it's a period of impressive overland trade, as we're going to see. Okay.